The elevator doors slid shut, trapping Charlie Thompson and Danny Goldfarb in a silent, oppressive box. Thompson, a seasoned investigator, clumped Goldfarb on the back, breaking the silence. "You're really a pro. I would have killed that dog." Goldfarb, still shaken from the interview with Mrs. Koch, managed a weak smile. "God, what could I do? Geraldo's not going to believe this one, Charlie." Mrs. Koch had been tight-lipped about many things, but one secret she couldn't hide was Elvis Presley's drug use. The king of rock and roll, the man who had charmed millions with his music and charisma, was a man in chains, bound by a relentless addiction to pills. Thompson, who had read every bit of Elvis literature available, knew the name John O'Grady. A former LAPD narcotics sergeant, O'Grady had become a private detective and had a front row seat to Elvis's downfall. In 1969, Elvis's attorney, E. Gregory Hooks Stratton, brought O'Grady into the fold to investigate a paternity suit brought by a waitress named Pat Parker. O'Grady ran polygraph tests, arranged blood tests, and conducted background checks on all witnesses. In the process, he got to know Elvis intimately. One day during a polygraph test, Elvis got up to use the bathroom and walked straight into a wall. O'Grady suspected the worst. Elvis was heavily drugged. O'Grady knew the signs of drug abuse all too well. With over 2,500 drug busts under his belt, he could see that Elvis was in deep trouble. The singer's pulse and breathing were abnormally low, clear indicators of heavy sedative use. O'Grady decided to help. He thought if Elvis could connect with law enforcement, it might deter his drug use. Instead, it had the opposite effect. Elvis became a vocal opponent of drugs, a collector of police badges, and a friend to narcotics officers, all while secretly abusing pills. Elvis's growing dependency on drugs worried his attorney and his father, Vernon Presley. They observed his weight gain and his slurred speech, and knew he was in danger. In 1976, Elvis blew an engagement at Lake Tahoe, and his family realized they had to act. They asked O'Grady to investigate where and from whom Elvis was getting his drugs. O'Grady, along with another private detective named Jack Kelly, a former DEA agent, uncovered a network of doctors and a dentist who were supplying Elvis with an alarming array of prescription drugs. The detectives discovered that many of these drugs were not prescribed in Elvis's name, but in the names of his entourage or their families. One doctor even wrote prescriptions in the name of Elvis's young daughter, Lisa Marie. Many of these prescriptions were filled at a pharmacy in Las Vegas, just steps away from the Hilton International, where Elvis lived and performed. O'Grady and Kelly confronted the medical culprits, but their efforts to bring them to justice fell flat. State and federal narcotics agencies took no action. Elvis's drug use continued unabated, and his health deteriorated rapidly. O'Grady and Kelly were determined to expose the truth. Goldfarb had been tasked with interviewing O'Grady and Kelly for a 2020 special on Elvis's death. He reached out to O'Grady, who agreed to meet the next day. The burly, white-haired detective didn't mince words. He told the 2020 crew that Elvis was a medical addict, and that the doctors who prescribed the drugs were largely responsible for his death at age 42. "Being around Presley, I observed that he couldn't sleep," O'Grady said. "He'd stay in his room for days, awake and wired. The drugs ravaged his body. He couldn't perform. He was always tired. Doctors know what drugs can do, and they should have taken action. They should have hospitalized him, but they didn't. They just kept taking his money and writing prescriptions." O'Grady placed the blame not only on the doctors, but also on Elvis's entourage, including his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. "They watched him commit suicide or watched him be murdered," he said. "They were all afraid for their jobs. They knew he was going to die, but they did nothing." O'Grady recounted a particularly harrowing experience in 1976, when he took his family to see Elvis perform at the Sahara Hotel in Las Vegas. "It was a bad experience. I felt so strongly for him, I cried. He was fat, he couldn't walk, and he forgot the words to his songs. I went backstage and looked at him, and I really thought he was going to die that night." Despite O'Grady's warnings and efforts, Elvis's drug use continued. The doctors and dentists who supplied him with drugs were driven by a mix of greed, carelessness, and star-struck admiration. Dr. Max Shapiro, a dentist known as Dr. Feelgood in Hollywood, was one of the main suppliers. He claimed to have designed an artificial heart and promised Elvis that he would give his father and Ginger's mother mechanical hearts in exchange for financial support. In early 1977, Shapiro dropped in on Elvis in Palm Springs, where he was vacationing with Ginger Alden and her sister Rosemary. Shapiro, who often made house calls with a black bag full of prescription drugs, suggested that he and his fiancée, Suzanne, get married right away. Elvis, always the entertainer, organized a spontaneous wedding ceremony. His hairdresser, Larry Geller, who had a minister's license, performed the ceremony, and Ginger served as the maid of honor. Elvis even bought rings, flowers, and music for the event. But the wedding was just another chapter in a tragic story. After Elvis's death, Shapiro filed a $15,000 claim against the Presley estate for unpaid dental work. The probate court in Memphis denied the claim, but the damage had already been done. The king of rock and roll was gone, and the truth about his final years was only beginning to come to light. The day after interviewing O'Grady and Kelly, Goldfarb reached Dr. Max Shapiro in his Beverly Hills office and made an appointment. The next morning, Goldfarb was ushered into Shapiro's office, where he met one of the strangest characters he had ever seen. Dr. Max was a small, slight man in his late 50s, with thick eyeglasses and a hairpiece that looked like a black cat had crawled onto his head and died. The hairpiece slipped from side to side as Shapiro got animated, but the doctor didn't seem to notice. It drove Goldfarb crazy. Goldfarb noticed other peculiar things about the office. There was no dental chair, or any standard dental equipment. Shapiro explained that he didn't need regular equipment in his practice. Goldfarb was skeptical. He had heard that Shapiro made house calls, but he didn't believe it was true. "I've never heard of a dentist who does that," Goldfarb said, surprised. "Yes, I think I'm about the only one that does that," Shapiro said proudly. He bragged that many of his patients were celebrities, like rock stars, popular singers, and the heads of Hollywood studios. "And you go to some of these celebrities' homes in the middle of the night?" Goldfarb asked. "Yes," Shapiro answered. "And you perform dental procedures?" "Yes, sometimes, not only for celebrities. I've gone to areas in the ghettos to help people in need," the dentist said. Goldfarb couldn't believe it. He imagined Dr. Max rushing to Watts with a bag of drugs in the middle of the night. He decided to get Shapiro talking about narcotics, hoping it would lead to a conversation about Elvis. "This 3-hour time zone change from New York to Los Angeles is killing me," Goldfarb said. "I can't sleep. I'm tired. This is killing me. Do you have anything that would help me sleep?" Shapiro reached into his desk and pulled out 2 white pills stamped Rohrer 714. "Try these Quaaludes. They ought to do the trick," he said, handing the pills to Goldfarb. Goldfarb was shocked. "I come here to investigate this guy for being a pill roller. He knows that, and he hands me Quaaludes. Incredible." Shapiro told Goldfarb that federal narcotics agents had given him a lot of trouble about how he handed out pills. "They're just not scientists," he complained. Goldfarb picked up a batch of prescription forms from Shapiro's desk. He read the drugs out loud: Percodan, Percodan, Demerol, Percodan, Demerol, Percodan. He knew Percodan and Demerol were powerful painkillers that were highly addictive. "Did Elvis retain you, doctor, because you prescribed things like Percodan and Demerol in a liberal manner?" Goldfarb asked. "No, I don't think so," Shapiro answered. He said he had first met Elvis when he did a root canal on him. He claimed he had given Elvis a copy of the physician's desk reference, so he could read about drugs and their interaction. "I always tried to make him knowledgeable. He was careful about what he took, except that if a doctor gave it to him, he would take it without question. That was his nature." Shapiro said he often wrote Elvis's prescriptions in the names of other members of his entourage to preserve his privacy. "It's done all the time," he said. Goldfarb asked if he could bring Geraldo Rivera and a camera crew back the next day to tape an interview. Shapiro agreed. Then Goldfarb asked one more question. "How do you respond to being called Dr. Feelgood?" "Dr. Painless would be all right," Shapiro answered. The next day, Geraldo Rivera was barely prepared for the interview. He looked at Shapiro's skewed wig and remembered Goldfarb's account of the Quaaludes. "Where do I start?" he thought. After a moment of silence, he blurted out, "How do you feel about being called Dr. Feelgood?" "Dr. Low Pain would be all right," Shapiro answered. "I understand what a patient goes through. I'm afraid of pain, and I never want my patients to feel it. Suzanne Shapiro, who looked much younger than her husband, floated into the room and seemed to be under the influence of something. She talked about marrying Dr. Max at Elvis's Palm Springs home, and about Elvis's inner healing power. Rivera's head was spinning from their zany answers. He called a halt to the questioning, and went outside with Goldfarb and the camera crew. A few minutes later, Shapiro emerged with his black bag. Rivera asked if it was the case he used for house calls. Shapiro said it wasn't and claimed it was for his wife, who needed regular doses of drugs. "Can we peek inside?" Rivera asked. "No, because I have narcotics in there now. I don't like to have it opened. I've been robbed," Shapiro said. "What kinds of narcotics are in there?" Rivera demanded. "There's Demerol. Demerol is the only one in there now," Shapiro said. "Can we go in private and see what's in there?" Rivera persisted. Shapiro refused. Rivera asked if he would give Quaaludes to someone who wasn't a patient. "I wouldn't give them to you," Shapiro snapped. "Then why Danny Goldfarb?" Rivera asked, pointing to his investigator. Shapiro said he gave Goldfarb the Quaaludes because he was working hard and not sleeping. "I felt he was telling the truth. I've never given it to anybody else." "You're so trusting," Rivera exclaimed. "What if Elvis asked you, or a musician at a studio?" "I don't give out pills at all, except under prescription or only to patients directly. Everyone has a record in my office," Shapiro said. "Was Goldfarb an exception?" Rivera asked. "Not quite," Shapiro replied. "Goldfarb wanted me to take care of his teeth first. I don't have a chart on him, but—" "Dan, did he take care of your teeth?" "No," Goldfarb replied. Goldfarb's next stop was Las Vegas, where he was assigned to check out Elias Fared Ghanem, a Palestinian Arab with Israeli and Lebanese passports. Dr. Ghanem was one of Elvis's regular physicians when he played Las Vegas. In an ABC interview, Ghanem said, "Elvis never took drugs or drinks. He only took sleeping pills, just like everyone else in his field. But I have never known Elvis to take any hard drugs." In Las Vegas, Goldfarb contacted local narcotics officers, recommended by his former colleagues in the New York Police Department. They identified the landmark pharmacy across from the Hilton as the place where most of Elvis's prescriptions were filled. Ghanem was a swarthy, baby-faced man who became the Hilton's house doctor in 1966. He also owned an emergency room at the Sunset Hotel and an airplane leasing firm that flew gamblers into the city. To accommodate Elvis, Ghanem built an extra room on top of his home, where Elvis could hide away and try to lose weight. Goldfarb tried to contact Ghanem, leaving messages at his office. ABC was doing a story on Elvis, and Dr. Ghanem might be mentioned. Would he do an interview? Ghanem agreed, but when Goldfarb showed up, a receptionist said the doctor had left town. Goldfarb had someone else call and say they were a sick guest at the Hilton. Ghanem was still in town and agreed to make a sick call. The direct approach wasn't working, and Ghanem would remain an unknown figure in the 2020 investigation. One of the first people to re-emerge was Marty Lacker, Elvis's high school friend and best man at his wedding. In June 1979, a month before Thompson started investigating in Memphis, Lacker published a book called Elvis, Portrait of a Friend. He admitted to his own battle with drug addiction and blamed Dr. Nichopoulos for his and Elvis's problems. "I am not a medical doctor, nor was I at Graceland when Elvis died, or present at the autopsy," Lacker wrote. "I do not know the cause of Elvis Presley's death, but I do know that Elvis had a drug problem. That's a direct and honest statement by someone who was as close to him for over 20 years as any human being in this world. More important, it is a statement by someone who shared the same drug problem with him." Lacker also blamed Dr. Max Shapiro for recklessly giving narcotics to Elvis. He recalled calling Shapiro from Memphis to arrange a quick flight to Las Vegas to pick up a prescription Elvis wanted. "I called Shapiro and told him Elvis needed some pills, either Impirin with codeine or Demerol, and asked if I could pick up the prescription when I got out there. He said yes. So I flew to Los Angeles, where I met Sonny West, and we went on to Vegas. After our business, we went by Shapiro's office and picked up the prescription, which I later had filled." Lacker's book received little attention in Memphis, but Charlie Thompson saw it as a breakthrough for 2020. And like Elvis's former bodyguards, Lacker had no grudge, and was considered credible by most of Elvis's inner circle. Lacker moved to Memphis from New York in 1952, when he was 15. He was an outsider at Humes High School, but he struck up a friendship with Elvis. Lacker also knew Red West and George Klein, who later played major roles in Elvis's life. Lacker began working for Elvis full-time in 1961. He lived at Graceland with his family for several years, and was made foreman of Elvis's operation in 1963. He held that job until 1967, when Colonel Parker demoted him. From then on, Lacker worked for Elvis part-time and started his own business. When Lacker's business struggled and he became addicted to drugs, Elvis helped him financially. Lacker's admission that both he and Elvis had wrecked their lives with drugs was a difficult experience. He and his wife Patsy, along with a professional writer, Leslie S. Smith, wrote the book in 3 parts. Patsy Lacker was frustrated by Elvis's treatment of women, especially those married to members of his Memphis Mafia. She blamed Dr. Nichopoulos for supplying the pills that addicted her husband and nearly destroyed her family. She claimed the Memphis internist practiced the same harmful medicine on Elvis. Charlie Thompson and Jim Cole were on a mission to uncover the truth about Elvis Presley's drug use and his death. They had already spoken to Patsy Lacker, who had told a harrowing story about her visit to Graceland to confront Dr. George Nichopoulos, Elvis's personal physician. Patsy had begged and threatened the doctor to stop giving drugs to Elvis and Marty Lacker, but Dr. Nichopoulos had only laughed at her. She had seen thousands of pills at Graceland and feared for Elvis's life. Leslie Smith, a researcher, had dug deeper into the drug problem by interviewing Elvis's former bodyguards, Dave Hebler, Red West, and Sonny West. They confirmed that Elvis had used cocaine and other illegal drugs, along with prescription medications. Smith's real breakthrough came when he obtained certified copies of prescriptions that Dr. Nichopoulos had written for Marty Lacker. Over a period of 46 months, Marty had taken an astonishing 13,291 pills, averaging 10 per day. This included 6,464 Placidils, a powerful sedative. When Smith showed the list to Sonny West, he was shocked. Sonny had taken drugs too, but never as many as Marty. He predicted that Elvis's drug use would be even more severe. Thompson was determined to find out the same information about Elvis, but Dr. Nichopoulos refused to talk, and there was no way to get Elvis's prescription records. Thompson decided to interview Marty Lacker, who was struggling to rebuild his life after his addiction. Marty looked different from his book jacket photo, bearded, heavier, and with less hair. His hands shook, his voice trembled, and he was uncomfortable talking about Elvis's drug problems. Despite the backlash from Elvis's inner circle and fans, Marty stood by the truth in his book. He traced Elvis's drug use back to the early 1960s, when he took appetite suppressants to manage his weight during movie shoots. Later, he started taking sleeping pills to unwind, and eventually began to take more than the prescribed amount by 1975. Thompson asked Marty about Vernon Presley and Linda Thompson, Elvis's girlfriend at the time, and whether they tried to stop Elvis. Marty said that Vernon never tried, but Linda had probably talked to Elvis about it. Marty himself didn't hold any grudges against Dr. Nichopoulos or the other doctors, but he believed that there should be more control over prescription drugs. During the interview, Marty mentioned that Dick Grob, Elvis's former chief of security, was writing a book. Grob, known for his suspicious nature, had moved to a new home in East Memphis. Thompson and Cole tracked him down and left a message. The next day, Grob called back, and they arranged to meet at a Denny's restaurant. Grob arrived wearing jeans and a t-shirt, looking tired and unshaven. He was tall and rangy, with a mustache that emphasized his chin. The meeting was tense, with Thompson and Grob clashing almost immediately. Grob, a former Air Force fighter pilot and police sergeant, had been close to Elvis and even helped Charlie Hodge run an Elvis souvenir shop. But now he was trying to write a book that he claimed would be a straightforward police investigation. Grob hinted that he had access to Elvis's autopsy report, but wouldn't share any details. Cole tried to persuade Grob to agree to an on-camera interview, but Grob was wary. He revealed that he was writing the book with Dan Mingori, and had already copyrighted a summary. He then left the restaurant, but Thompson wasn't done yet. He contacted a freelance reporter in Washington, David Rothman, to investigate Grob and Mingori. Rothman found the copyrighted material, but couldn't access it without a legal request. Thompson and Cole met with their lawyer, Mike Pleasance, to figure out how to make Grob's copyrighted material part of their lawsuit. Pleasance suggested taking Grob's deposition, and Chuck Harrell, a junior partner, reviewed the material. Harrell was puzzled by Grob's claims, which seemed to be fabricated. Grob's manuscript, titled The Elvis Conspiracy, painted Ginger Alden as a manipulative girlfriend who might have been involved in Elvis's death. However, the story was full of inconsistencies and lacked credible evidence. Thompson and Cole knew they had a long road ahead, but they were determined to uncover the truth about Elvis's final days. Grob, writing with Mingori's help, said that Ginger had called the National Enquirer before telling anyone at Graceland that Elvis was in trouble. Grob's source was James Kirk, a freelance reporter for the Enquirer. Kirk said he got a call around 11:30 a.m. from someone he recognized as Ginger, telling him to wait for an important call from Graceland. According to Grob, this happened 3 hours before Ginger called for help. Grob tried to back up this claim by talking to Joe Esposito, Al Strada, and Charlie Hodge. They all said Ginger looked fresh and ready when they rushed upstairs. Two maids also said they heard the shower running upstairs when Elvis was already on the bathroom floor. Grob thought Ginger was being disloyal for money. Pleasance, while reading Grob's synopsis, found Grob's theory that Elvis was dying from bone cancer. This was shocking because there was no mention of cancer in any of the other information they had. Thompson and Cole were stunned and wondered where Grob got this idea. They decided to investigate and found two medical insiders who could help. Cole called a pathologist from the Baptist Hospital autopsy team. The pathologist said there was no truth to the bone cancer story. He explained that they had tested bone marrow samples and found no cancer. The pathologist suggested that someone might be trying to divert attention from the drug reports. Thompson and Cole then split up to investigate further. Cole looked into Dr. George Nichopoulos' background, while Thompson tried to find someone from the autopsy team to interview on camera. A medical source suggested Dr. Noel Florendo, who had participated in the autopsy. Thompson met Florendo and arranged an on-camera interview. The next day, Thompson, Geraldo Rivera, and a camera crew went to Doctor's Hospital to interview Florendo. The interview went well, but the camera broke down and it started raining. They managed to fix the camera and finish the interview. Florendo confirmed that there was no evidence of a heart attack and agreed with the diagnosis of polypharmacy, meaning Elvis died from the interaction of several drugs. Florendo also said that the doctors were upset when Dr. Francisco announced a heart attack as the cause of death. After the interview, they realized the tape was missing. Geraldo's brother, Craig, had lost it. Thompson was furious, but eventually, Craig found the tapes and had them duplicated. Thompson was relieved, but knew they needed to be careful since Florendo might mention the interview to others. Thompson also looked into Elvis's business deals. He found Michael McMahon, who had partnered with Elvis, Dr. Nichopoulos, and Joe Esposito to start racquetball clubs. The venture, called Presley Center Courts, Inc., was undercapitalized and went broke. When the contractor couldn't get paid, Elvis pulled out, leaving McMahon, Nichopoulos, and Esposito in financial trouble. They sued Elvis. McMahon told Thompson that drugs were a big part of Elvis's life in the last few years. Just before their business relationship fell apart, McMahon remembered meeting Elvis and Colonel Parker in Lake Tahoe. Things seemed to be going well with their racquetball venture. But a few weeks later, Elvis called McMahon late one night, and Joe Esposito was on the line too. Elvis was completely incoherent and irrational, accusing McMahon of illegal things and even threatening to kill him. McMahon tried to calm Elvis down, but Elvis just got angrier and said he didn't want anything to do with McMahon, Dr. Nichopoulos, or anyone else involved in the business, accusing them of stealing from him. After the call, McMahon reached out to Dr. Nichopoulos to understand what had gotten into Elvis. Nichopoulos explained that Elvis became very paranoid when he took certain drugs, but things would be fine once the drug wore off. However, it didn't work out that way, and their partnership dissolved. McMahon later recalled being in Nichopoulos' office, discussing a lawsuit against Elvis. Elvis had fired Nichopoulos and banned him from traveling on concert tours, relying instead on Dr. Elias Gainham, a Las Vegas physician. During their discussion, a call came from Nichopoulos' nurse, Tish Henley. Even though Elvis had banned Nichopoulos from the tours, he still allowed Nurse Henley to be there. Henley was worried because Dr. Gainham was giving Elvis injections with dirty needles, and they were concerned about Elvis getting hepatitis. Suddenly, Colonel Parker called Nichopoulos, begging him to return to Elvis's team because they were worried about the shows. Soon after, Elvis's condition worsened, and he had to be hospitalized and detoxed from drugs. McMahon said Elvis was in terrible shape during the years he knew him. He estimated Elvis's weight at around 240 to 255 pounds, and described him as a zombie with no muscle tone. Elvis's bodyguards often manipulated him, knowing that certain drugs would make him more suggestible. When Elvis was on uppers, he was more generous, and people often bragged about getting expensive gifts from him. Some even sold these gifts the next day. Thompson, the investigator, had tried to meet Dr. Nichopoulos but was unsuccessful. Nichopoulos was worried about the Dilaudid prescription he had written for Elvis just hours before his death. Thompson knew that Dilaudid was a powerful drug, often used for terminally ill patients. According to Elvis's bodyguards, Red and Sonny West, Dilaudid was Elvis's favorite drug. McMahon told Thompson that Nichopoulos wrote the last prescription and gave it to Ricky Stanley, Elvis's stepbrother, who had it filled at Baptist Hospital. Nichopoulos claimed the pathologists were unaware of this prescription. Thompson found the toxicology reports and noticed that Dilaudid wasn't listed. He decided to investigate further and asked a friend at Baptist Hospital to check the pharmacy records. The records confirmed that Nichopoulos had written a Dilaudid prescription on August 16, 1977, and it was filled by pharmacist W.S. Nash. Thompson tracked down Nash's son, Jesse, who told him his father was living in Madisonville, Kentucky, and was troubled by the prescription. Jesse arranged for Thompson to interview his father. Thompson and his crew flew to Madisonville and met W.S. Nash, who was frail and in poor health. Nash recalled the night of August 16, 1977. At 2:30 a.m., a young man, later identified as Ricky Stanley, came in with a prescription from Dr. Nichopoulos for Elvis. Nash filled the prescription for 6 Dilaudid tablets. The next day, he heard about Elvis's death and was deeply shaken. He felt responsible and suffered from guilt and nightmares for months. Thompson asked Nash about the effects of combining Dilaudid with other drugs. Nash explained that the combination could be extremely toxic and that he would not have filled the prescription if he knew about Elvis's other drug use. Thompson wondered why the toxicology report didn't show Dilaudid. His cameraman, Louis Bailey, suggested that the drug might not have been absorbed or that the screen might have missed it if they weren't looking for it specifically. The interview was intense, and Thompson and his crew left Nash's home, feeling the weight of the old man's guilt. As they flew back to Memphis, Thompson and Bailey discussed the next steps, including checking the stomach contents from Elvis's autopsy to see if Dilaudid was present. Later, while interviewing the hospital spokesman, Morris Elliott, Thompson and his crew witnessed a dramatic heart attack resuscitation in the same operating room where Elvis had died. The medical team's efforts to save the patient were successful, and the room erupted in applause. Unlike Elvis, this patient survived, leaving a stark contrast to the tragic end of the king of rock and roll. Elliott, Rivera, and Thompson entered the operating suite, a stark and sterile room where the air hung heavy with the scent of antiseptics. Elliott, a seasoned producer, broke the silence, telling the team members that they were free to talk to Rivera, a television correspondent. Some of the team had been part of the failed attempt to revive Elvis on August 16, 1977. Rivera, sensing the gravity of the situation, approached a doctor who had been on the Harvey team, the emergency response team that had worked on Elvis. The doctor's face was grim as he recalled that night. "I would say he was dead," he said, his voice tinged with a mix of regret and professionalism. "Most people are warm, he was cold. He looked like he'd been that way for some time." The doctor explained that there was no hope of reviving Elvis. "He was very cold, very blue. He was obviously very dead when we got him." Rivera's curiosity was piqued. He asked what happened to Elvis's stomach contents. The doctor seemed taken aback, almost irritated. "That was something we never paid attention to," he replied. Rivera then noticed a nurse washing out a plastic surgical bottle in a nearby sink. He asked her what she had thrown away, "Stomach contents," she said matter-of-factly. "Do you always throw them away?" Rivera asked. "Yes," the nurse replied, her tone suggesting it was a routine procedure. After speaking with the doctor, Rivera turned back to the nurse. "Do you know what happened to Elvis's stomach contents?" he asked again. "I don't know," she answered. "They're not usually sent to the laboratory to be analyzed." "Why not?" Rivera wondered. "That's the least of your problems. You don't think of an autopsy when you're on the Harvey team. We're interested in getting the heart of the patient beating again," she explained. "Did anyone request that you save those samples in the case of Elvis Presley?" Rivera pressed. "Not to my knowledge," she replied. "So it's reasonable to assume that they were flushed at some point?" Rivera asked. "Yes," she answered. "Our purpose is to resuscitate the person. We're trying to prevent an autopsy. We're not worried about what they might find in an autopsy and saving things for later." Elliot, overhearing the conversation, realized that Rivera had stumbled upon a significant detail. He suggested that Rivera ask Dr. Harold Sexton and Dr. Eric Muirhead, both pathologists involved in the court case, to make Elvis's autopsy a public record about the missing stomach contents. Elliot believed that under oath, Dr. Sexton would confirm that the stomach contents were discarded by the Harvey team, a fact that the Baptist Hospital pathologists considered a major setback in their investigation. Geraldo, the producer, reviewed the list of people present in the surgical suite when the Harvey team worked on Elvis's body. He noted that Dr. George Nichopoulos, Elvis's personal physician, had been there from the start and stayed until Elvis was taken to the morgue. Rivera, however, had forgotten to ask the nurse if anyone had ordered her to throw away the stomach contents. He wondered if Dr. Nichopoulos might have been involved. Thompson, remembering a conversation with real estate developer Mike McMahon, broke the silence. "Mike McMahon told me that Nichopoulos was surprised that the Baptist Hospital pathologists didn't find the Dilaudid in Elvis's system. What about it, Morris?" "Have your lawyers ask Dr. Sexton. Maybe he knows. If that doesn't work, then ask Dr. Nichopoulos," Elliot answered. "Every time we learn more, we just get more questions to ask," Thompson said. Despite the challenges, the ABC team was excited to have uncovered real evidence. Later, Thompson had an idea. He and Cole had interviewed Ginger Alden, Elvis's fiancée, several times. Ginger was eager to meet Rivera, who had a reputation as a charmer. Thompson thought it was time to introduce them. Ginger Alden, like many young women who dated Elvis, was introduced to him by George Klein, a longtime friend and disc jockey. Klein had served a short jail sentence for mail fraud, and Elvis had tried to help him, even calling the White House. Klein and Elvis had been classmates at Humes High School, and Klein introduced Dr. George Nichopoulos to Elvis, a connection that would later play a significant role in Elvis's life. Klein was known as Elvis's matchmaker. He introduced Elvis to Linda Thompson and many others. When Linda and Elvis split in 1976, Klein introduced Ginger Alden, a 20-year-old beauty. Ginger had grown up idolizing Elvis, and her mother, Jo Laverne Alden, was a devoted fan. Ginger's first visit to Graceland was memorable, and she soon became a regular. Elvis and Ginger's relationship had its ups and downs. In January 1977, Elvis proposed to Ginger in the same bathroom where he would later die. He gave her a $70,000 diamond ring, but they never set a wedding date. Their first major argument was over a trip to Nashville. Ginger refused to go, and Elvis, in a fit of rage, fired a gun over her head. Despite this, they continued to plan their future. However, their relationship began to sour. Elvis started making disparaging remarks about Ginger and dating others. Dick Grob, one of Elvis's security men, said that Elvis was unhappy with Ginger and had no real intention of marrying her. Grob also claimed that Elvis had planned to leave Ginger behind on the concert tour that was scheduled to start on the day he died. After Elvis's death, Ginger faced criticism from Elvis's inner circle. She was accused of selling her story to the tabloids and not being attentive to Elvis's needs. Despite this, Ginger remained a significant figure in the Elvis legacy. When the ABC team arrived at the Alden home, Ginger was dressed elegantly and acted the part of a Southern belle. Her mother, Jo Laverne, was bustling around, providing iced tea and chatting. Rivera began the interview, asking Ginger about the night before Elvis's death. Ginger spoke about their trip to the dentist and Elvis's plans for their wedding. Ginger's account was detailed, and she shared that Elvis had gone into more detail about their wedding plans than ever before. He had talked about announcing the wedding publicly after his concert in Memphis on August 27th. As Ginger spoke, the camera captured her every word, adding another piece to the complex puzzle of Elvis Presley's final days. Ginger Alden sat down with Dick Rivera, a journalist, to share her account of the last moments she spent with Elvis Presley. The day started early, around 6 a.m., when the sun was just coming up. Ginger, Elvis, his cousin Billy Smith, and Billy's wife Jo had been playing racquetball. Elvis was in a great mood, and after their game he played the piano and sang spiritual songs for Ginger in the lounge area of the racquetball building. After the music, they went upstairs to the master bedroom. Ginger was sleepy, but Elvis couldn't fall asleep. He complained about it, and Ricky Stanley, one of Elvis's helpers, brought him some medication to help him sleep. Elvis went to the bathroom, saying he was going to read. Ginger warned him not to fall asleep, and he promised he wouldn't. That was the last time she saw him. Ginger woke up between 1 and 2 p.m. and realized Elvis hadn't come back to bed. Instead of looking for him right away, she called a friend to check on some tour plans. After the call, she decided to check on Elvis. She went to the bathroom and knocked, but there was no answer. When she opened the door, she found Elvis on the floor. Ginger thought Elvis might have fallen asleep or hit his head, but when she turned him over, she knew something was very wrong. She went into shock but quickly called for help. Al Strada, one of Elvis's bodyguards, came up, followed by Joe Esposito, Elvis's friend. They tried to revive Elvis, but it was too late. Ginger's story had some confusing parts. For example, she said she was asleep when Elvis went to the bathroom, but she also mentioned that Ricky Stanley brought more medication later. How did she know this if she was asleep? Some people who saw Ginger that day said she was perfectly dressed and made up, which didn't make sense if she had just woken up. Rivera asked Ginger about the medication Elvis took. She said it was mostly tranquilizers to help him sleep, but she didn't know the exact names. When Rivera asked if Elvis was a drug abuser, Ginger strongly denied it. She said Elvis only took prescribed medication and wasn't a drug addict. Rivera and Ginger talked about the people around Elvis, and Ginger suggested that some of them might have had a reason to harm him. She even mentioned that Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, had theories about foul play. However, Ginger herself had inherited nothing from Elvis, as Tennessee law prevented her from inheriting since she had witnessed his will. Ginger's mother, Jo Alden, also shared her thoughts. She said Vernon Presley had mentioned a shot that wouldn't show up in blood tests, but she didn't know what he meant. Jo said Ginger called her around 2 p.m., telling her about Elvis not coming back to bed. Later, Ginger called again, hysterical, saying something had happened to Elvis. Rivera pointed out some inconsistencies in Ginger's story. For example, how could she sleep for 8 hours without realizing Elvis wasn't in bed? Ginger said she hadn't slept the night before, but Rivera noted that doctors said Elvis had died around 9 a.m., and his body had already stiffened and turned blue by the time Ginger found him. The conversation then shifted to Ginger's future plans. She had done some modeling, and was planning to act in a film called Autumn Mist. She said Elvis didn't like people in show business, but she believed he would be proud of her now. After the interview, Rivera's team discussed the inconsistencies in Ginger's story. They decided to investigate further, especially the part about Ginger making phone calls and being well-groomed when help arrived. They also wanted to talk to more people and get a clearer picture of what happened on that tragic day. The sun beat down mercilessly on the overdressed crowd gathered at Elvis Presley's refurbished birthplace in Tupelo, Mississippi. It was August 1979, and the heat was almost unbearable. Sweat trickled down faces, soaked through fancy clothes, and made the air thick and heavy. Despite the discomfort, people stood respectfully, waiting for the ceremonies to begin. The women of Tupelo had worked hard to transform Elvis's birthplace into a cozy, picturesque home. A far cry from the humble shack it once was when Elvis was born on January 8, 1935. Elvis's story was one of struggle and triumph. His parents, Vernon and Gladys Presley, had built the small house with help from Vernon's father and brother. They were poor, but they made it a home. Elvis's birth was a joyous occasion. Though it came with a tragedy, his identical twin brother, Jesse Garin, was stillborn. The family faced many hardships, including Vernon's conviction for check forgery and his imprisonment, which led to their eviction from the house. Gladys and Elvis moved in with Vernon's parents, and Gladys worked hard to support them. In 1948, the Presleys left Tupelo for Memphis, hoping for a better life. Elvis's rise to fame was a testament to his talent and perseverance, but it also brought its share of controversies. On this hot August day, politicians and fans gathered to dedicate Elvis's birthplace as a national landmark, speaking of Tupelo with pride and admiration. Among the crowd were Charlie Thompson, Geraldo Rivera, and a camera crew from ABC 2020. They had come to cover the event and to interview some of Elvis's closest friends. One of their targets was Dick Grob, a former security man who was rumored to be writing a book called The Elvis Conspiracy. Rivera, known for his aggressive interviewing style, cornered Grob and pressed him for details about the book. Grob remained tight-lipped, refusing to comment on the allegations of negligence in Elvis's death. Rivera then turned to Charlie Hodge, a longtime friend of Elvis, and asked about the drug abuse rumors. Hodge, emotional and defensive, insisted that he never saw Elvis use drugs, and that he would never reveal any personal details about his friend. Hodge's loyalty to Elvis was clear, even if it meant keeping secrets. The next day, the 2020 team traveled to a cow pasture near Bullfrog Corner, where Elvis had once owned a ranch called The Circle. The ranch was a place where Elvis and his friends could escape the pressures of fame. They planned to light an eternal flame at a large white cross to honor Elvis's memory. However, the flame didn't last long, and the ranch eventually became another failed attempt to capitalize on Elvis's legacy. Among the crowd at the ranch, Rivera spotted Billy Smith, Elvis's favorite cousin. Billy had been a constant presence in Elvis's life, offering a down-to-earth perspective and taking care of his wardrobe. Despite their close bond, Billy found himself without a bequest in Elvis's will, forcing him to return to his old job at the Illinois Central Railroad. As the ceremonies came to a close, the heat and the speeches took their toll on the crowd. But for those who had known Elvis, the memories of his life and his music would endure, a bittersweet reminder of a man who had touched the hearts of millions.